The billionaire husband screamed at his pregnant wife, "Get rid of it. I don't want a child." 5 years later, he saw her with twins and the ground disappeared beneath his feet. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to the Penthouse Diaries. May the Almighty God wrap every abandoned woman in unshakable peace, every single mother in supernatural strength, and every broken heart in grace that refuses to let go. May your hands never tire of choosing life when the world tells you to give up. May your scars become stories of victory. You are the sunrise after the longest night, the prayer that outlasts every storm, the love that never runs dry. May your heart stay whole, your faith unbroken, and your light forever burning. My precious family, your courage is someone else's miracle waiting to happen. Alike is a prayer whispered over every woman who was told she wasn't enough. If your heart beats with hope, like this video. If your soul walks in faith, comment. Faith over fear. And if you believe redemption is real, subscribe and join the Penthouse Diaries family. The wedding ring landed on the marble counter between them like a grenade with the pin already pulled. White gold and diamonds that were supposed to represent forever, now abandoned in the space where promises go to die. Karen Lucas's hand trembled as she pulled it from her finger, her reflection distorted in the glossy surface beneath it. All that glass and steel and imported Italian stones suddenly felt like a tomb. She had rehearsed this conversation for 3 days, imagining different ways to tell him, picturing his initial shock melting into wonder. Maybe even joy. Maybe tears. Instead, Brandon Lucas stood with his back to her, shoulders rigid, staring out at the city lights sprawled below their penthouse, like a kingdom he refused to share. His silence was more violent than screaming. "This solves nothing." His voice was flat, executive, the same tone he used with underperforming VPs. "You can't possibly think I'm ready for this. That we're ready for this." Karen pressed her palm against her stomach, still flat, but already carrying the life that would redefine everything. "I thought you'd want to know. I thought after all those nights you talked about legacy, about building something that mattered beyond quarterly reports, that maybe this, maybe we, could be different." Brandon turned then, and his face belonged to a stranger. Gone was the man who traced her cheekbones in the darkness and whispered about escaping his father's shadow, about finally living for something real. This was the board-approved heir to Lucas Technologies, the son groomed since childhood to value control over connection, empire over intimacy. "You thought wrong." He moved to the bar, pouring scotch he didn't need, his movements mechanical. "I have obligations, Karen. The IPO launches in 6 months. My father's breathing down my neck about optics. The board is already questioning my focus. A baby right now? It's not strategic. It's not—" He stopped himself, but the damage was done. "Strategic." Karen repeated the word like it was coated in acid. "That's what this is to you. That's what I am. Don't make this emotional." Brandon's jaw locked. "We knew what we were building here. The company comes first. It always has. I never hid that from you." The lie floated in the air between them, so obvious Karen almost laughed. She remembered every promise, every late-night confession, every moment he'd pretended to be a man capable of choosing love over legacy. For 3 years she had believed the performance, mistaking his temporary vulnerability for permanent transformation. "You told me you loved me." Her voice cracked, and she hated the weakness. "Last month in Santorini, you said you wanted to build a life that was ours, not theirs. I said what we both needed to hear." Brandon's words were surgical, designed to sever cleanly. "You're brilliant, Karen. You made me feel human for a while, but this was never going to end any other way. I'm married to this company. The legacy is already written. This child would derail everything." "This child." Karen stood, her legs barely holding her. "You keep saying this like it's a line item to be cut from a budget. There's a heartbeat inside me, Brandon. There's life. There's a complication." He set down the glass, his eyes empty of everything except calculation. "Get rid of it. I don't want a child. Not now. Not like this. Maybe not ever." The cruelty of it, the casual erasure, finally cut through her shock, igniting something ancient and fierce in her chest. Karen looked at this man she had loved, truly looked, and saw the truth she'd been avoiding. He had never been hers. He had always belonged to the empire, to the board, to his father's ghost. Everything between them had been borrowed time, stolen moments, a beautiful lie she'd mistaken for a life. I'm not doing this. She left the ring where it lay, her voice steady now, cold and clear. Whatever happens next is my choice. My life. My future. Brandon's expression flickered, something almost like panic crossing his features before the mask snapped back into place. You have 48 hours to think clearly. After that, my lawyers will contact you with an agreement. Take the settlement, Karen. Don't make this harder than it has to be. The only thing hard here, Karen said, grabbing her purse, her movements deliberate despite the chaos howling inside her skull, is understanding how I ever believed you were capable of loving anyone more than you love your reflection in Forbes. Get out! His voice went ice cold, all pretense of civility abandoned. Get out before security escorts you. Karen walked to the elevator on legs that felt borrowed from someone else's body, her heels clicking against imported marble that had once seemed magical. Back when she was young enough to believe fairy tales came with penthouse views. The doors closed on Brandon's silhouette, still standing at that window, still choosing the skyline over her, still proving that some men were raised to consume rather than cherish. The lobby was empty at this hour, just the night security guard who nodded politely, unaware that her entire world had imploded 40 floors above his head. Karen pushed through the revolving doors into the night air, rain beginning to hammer down in biblical sheets, soaking through her coat before she'd taken 3 steps. She walked for blocks, maybe miles, barely aware of direction or destination, her mind replaying every moment, every lie, every promise that had been calculated manipulation. The pregnancy confirmation in her purse felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Somewhere between the financial district and the river, Karen stopped under a flickering streetlight, pulled out her phone, and stared at Brandon's name in her contacts. Then she turned it off and kept walking into a future he would never control. The rain followed Karen all the way to her sister's apartment in Brooklyn, where the locks were cheaper, the walls were thinner, and nobody cared that her last name was Lucas. Maya opened the door in sweatpants and a Columbia Law hoodie, took one look at Karen's soaked hair and hollow eyes, and pulled her inside without a word. The studio apartment smelled like instant ramen and lavender candles, a sharp contrast to the penthouse's imported French perfume and custom air filtration. Karen collapsed onto the futon, still clutching her purse, still replaying Brandon's voice. Get rid of it. I don't want a child. He said it like I was proposing a bad investment, Karen whispered, her voice raw. Like our baby was a quarterly loss he needed to cut. Maya wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, hands steady and sure. What are you going to do? Karen's hand drifted to her stomach, protective and certain despite the chaos screaming through her mind. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm keeping this baby. Then we figure it out. Maya sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder. One day at a time. Through the thin walls, they could hear a neighbor's television, a couple arguing in Spanish, a baby crying 3 floors up. Normal life, messy and loud and real. Everything the penthouse had never been. Karen closed her eyes and let herself imagine a different future. One where her child grew up knowing love mattered more than stock portfolios. Her phone, still powered off in her purse, held 17 missed calls from Brandon by morning. She knew without checking. Maya made coffee while Karen sat at the tiny kitchen table, staring at a brochure that had been tucked inside a library book. Pine Lake, Where Time Slows Down. She'd picked it up weeks ago during a rare afternoon alone, drawn to the photographs of quiet streets and water that reflected sky instead of skyscrapers. I need to disappear, Karen said suddenly. Somewhere he can't find me. Somewhere his lawyers and his PR team and his guilt can't reach. Maya studied the brochure, then studied her sister. You're sure? I'm sure that if I stay in this city, he'll turn me into a problem to be managed, a narrative to be controlled. Karen's voice steadied with each word. I won't let him do that to our child. The clinic appointment came first, a small practice in Queens where nobody recognized her face from society pages. Dr. Patel, a soft-spoken woman with gray threading through her black hair, conducted her first official prenatal checkup. 6 weeks pregnant, everything progressing normally, though her elevated stress levels were concerning. "You'll need consistent prenatal care," Dr. Patel said gently, studying Karen's pale face and trembling hands. "And you'll need to manage your anxiety. Stress this severe can complicate things." Karen nodded, accepting the prescription for prenatal vitamins and the list of recommended obstetricians, knowing she wouldn't use any of the Manhattan doctors listed. She needed someone who'd never heard of Lucas Technologies, who wouldn't Google her last name between appointments. The next morning, Maya helped her file divorce papers at the Brooklyn courthouse. Simple, uncontested, requesting only the legal minimum settlement. The clerk processed the forms without looking up, unaware she was watching a Lucas walk away from millions. Karen signed her maiden name at the bottom, Tyler. It felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen. Back at Maya's apartment, Karen made her decision with the clarity that only comes after everything else has shattered. She opened her laptop, not the one Brandon's IT department had configured, but her old college MacBook that still had stickers from her environmental science classes, and bought a one-way bus ticket to Pine Lake under her maiden name, Karen Tyler. The departure was scheduled for dawn, 2 days away, 48 hours to disappear before Brandon's lawyers came hunting with their settlements and their threats. Maya helped her pack a single suitcase, practical clothes, a few photographs from before the marriage, and the positive pregnancy test wrapped carefully in tissue paper. Evidence, proof, a promise. "He's going to call me," Maya warned. "He's going to send people. Tell him I made my choice." Karen zipped the suitcase closed. "Tell him the complication is no longer his concern." On her last night in the city, Karen stood at Maya's window watching traffic crawl through rain-slick streets, 40 stories below. Nothing like the view from the penthouse, but somehow more honest. Her phone buzzed once, Brandon's 23rd call, then went silent as she powered it down for the last time. At 5:47 a.m., Karen Tyler boarded a Greyhound bus heading north, her entire life reduced to one suitcase and one fragile, fierce hope. As the city disappeared behind her in the gray dawn, Brandon Lucas was just waking up to find his PR chief already crafting a statement about his estranged wife's unexpected departure. He was building a narrative. She was building a life, and only one of them knew which would last. Pine Lake looked nothing like the brochure, and that was exactly what Karen needed. The room above Sunrise Bakery cost $400 a month. A third-floor walk-up with slanted ceilings, a window that stuck halfway open, and water stains mapping the ceiling like continents. But every morning at 5 a.m., the smell of fresh bread rose through the floorboards like a promise that life could still be warm and simple and good. The owner, Mrs. Amber, offered Karen part-time work without asking questions. Washing mixing bowls, wiping down tables, boxing pastries for the morning rush. $6 an hour under the table, paid in cash at the end of each week, enough to start, but not enough to survive, which is why she also took the housekeeping job at the Pine Lake Inn. Karen's hands, which had once worn sapphire rings and known nothing heavier than champagne flutes, now smelled permanently of dish soap and cinnamon. The nausea hit hardest during the afternoon shift at the Pine Lake Inn, where she cleaned rooms for another $40 a day. She'd learned to carry crackers in her apron pocket, to breathe through her mouth when changing sheets, to lock bathroom doors when the waves became unbearable. The exhaustion was crushing, a bone-deep weariness that made climbing the 3 flights to her room feel like summiting Everest. Money became a language she'd never spoken fluently. Every dollar was counted, stretched, sacrificed. Groceries meant choosing between fresh vegetables and prenatal vitamins. Laundry meant hand-washing clothes in the Kid Amber sink because the laundromat charged $3 per load. At her 8-week checkup at the county clinic, the nurse, a kind woman named Patricia, who wore scrubs covered in cartoon bears, noticed Karen's trembling hands and elevated blood pressure. "You're carrying a lot of stress, honey," Patricia said gently. "There's a prenatal yoga class at the community center. Sliding scale, very gentle. Might help." Karen almost laughed. Yoga felt like something from her old life, from when wellness meant spa retreats and private instructors. But anxiety was eating her alive. stealing sleep and peace and the joy she wanted to feel about this baby. The class met in a church basement on Thursday evenings. 10 women on donated mats, led by an instructor named Beth whose calm voice and patient hands seemed designed specifically for broken things. Karen folded herself onto a mat in the back corner and learned to breathe again. Deep, intentional breaths that reminded her body it was safe, that she was allowed to take up space, that this baby deserved a mother who wasn't constantly drowning. 12 weeks brought the detailed ultrasound, scheduled at the county hospital's prenatal clinic. Karen lay on the paper-covered table, her heart hammering against her ribs as the technician squirted cold gel across her barely visible bump. Fear clawed at her throat. What if something was wrong? What if the stress had damaged the baby? What if her body was failing at the one thing that mattered now? The technician moved the wand slowly, studying the screen with professional silence that stretched into eternity. "Ms. Amber," she said finally, turning the monitor, "I need you to see this." Karen's breath stopped. On the grainy black and white screen, two distinct flickers pulsed in rhythm. Two heartbeats, two tiny forms, two impossible miracles. "Twins," the technician said, smiling now. "Fraternal girls, from what I can see, both measuring perfectly." The world tilted. Karen stared at those two heartbeats, feeling terror and wonder crash over her in equal measure. Two babies, twice the blessing, twice the risk, half the resources. No health insurance, no partner, no safety net, but also twice the love, twice the purpose, twice the reason to survive. "My daughters," Karen whispered, her hand pressing against her stomach where two futures were growing. "My girls." She made a vow right there on that paper-covered table, with the ultrasound gel still wet on her skin. Even if their father never laid eyes on them, even if the world never knew their story, these babies would never, not for one single day, doubt that they were wanted, chosen, fiercely loved. Brandon Lucas had screamed that he didn't want a child, but Karen Tyler wanted these children enough for 1,000 fathers. The second trimester brought swelling so severe that Karen's ankles disappeared entirely, replaced by flesh that held the imprint of her socks for hours. 22 weeks pregnant with twins, and her body was staging a rebellion. The emergency room visit at week 24, preterm contractions that sent her into panic bed rest for 10 days, cost $800 she didn't have. Mrs. Amber from the bakery quietly slipped $200 into her apron pocket. Patricia from the clinic forgot to process certain charges. The yoga community passed a basket and covered the rest. Karen learned what it meant to live on the edge, choosing between the electric bill and iron supplements, between bus fare and protein, between dignity and survival. Some nights she ate peanut butter straight from the jar, too exhausted to make anything else, her swollen feet propped on pillows donated from the inns lost and found. But Thursday evenings remained sacred. Beth noticed it first, the way other women gravitated toward Karen during class, how her quiet presence seemed to settle the room's anxious energy. At 28 weeks, when Karen could barely fold forward over her expanding belly, Beth asked her to stay after. "You have a gift," Beth said simply. "The women trust you. They feel safe with you." At first, Karen just folded mats and straightened blankets. Then Beth had her demonstrate modified poses, her hands gentle on trembling shoulders, her voice soft with understanding when someone broke down mid-savasana. By week 32, Karen was leading breathing exercises, guiding terrified first-time mothers through the same panic that still woke her at 3 a.m. She discovered something profound. Her pain had purpose. Every woman who whispered about an absent father, every belly that carried a child the world called a mistake, Karen understood them completely. She prayed silently over their rounded stomachs during final relaxation, asking the Almighty to protect these babies, to strengthen these mothers, to turn their suffering into stories of survival. She never mentioned God aloud, but her hands spoke the language of grace. Week 35 brought lightning pain and her water breaking in the bakery stockroom at dawn. The ambulance ride blurred into urgent voices and monitors, beeping warnings about fetal distress. The emergency cesarean decision came fast. Twins in distress, Karen's blood pressure spiking, No time for fear, only surrender. Through the haze of medication, Karen heard them. Two sharp cries cutting through operating room silence. Two impossibly tiny humans placed on her chest, skin to skin, hearts beating against hers. Kayla, she whispered to the first, all dark hair and furious fists. Julia, she breathed to the second, quieter but watching everything with ancient eyes. They weighed 4 pounds each, small but fierce, breathing on their own despite arriving 5 weeks early. The NICU nurses called them fighters. Karen called them miracles. In the exhausted hours after birth, tubes and monitors and her body split open and stitched back together, Karen held one daughter in each arm and felt the truth settle into her bones. Brandon's worst day, the day he screamed that he didn't want a child, had somehow given birth to her best days. These girls, this love, this impossible, terrifying, beautiful purpose. 72 hours later, pushing Julia's bassinet past the hospital lobby, Karen caught a muted television screen mounted near the vending machines. Brandon's face filled the frame, older, sharper, standing at a podium with Lucas Technologies emblazoned behind him. The caption scrolled beneath, "Tech billionaire closes record-breaking acquisition. Personal life remains private following tragic divorce." She thought of the birth certificates in her purse, where she'd written Tyler in the surname field. Her daughters would carry her name, not his legacy. Tragic. As if she were dead. As if he were the victim. Karen watched for exactly 3 seconds, then turned away. She had daughters to raise, and he had chosen his empire. 5 years passed like two different lifetimes. Karen's mornings began at 5:30 with the bakery's opening shift, flour dusting her yoga pants as she pulled cinnamon rolls from industrial ovens. By 8, she transitioned to the community center studio, leading prenatal classes where her own story, carefully edited but honest, gave her the authority that no certification could match. Afternoons belonged to Kayla and Julia. Kayla was chaos in motion, climbing everything, fearless on playground equipment, scraped knees, and wild laughter. She'd inherited Brandon's reckless confidence without his need for control. Julia moved through the world like a small philosopher, watching, thinking, asking questions that had no easy answers. "Why don't we have a daddy?" she'd asked once at 4 years old, and Karen had answered with careful truth. "Because sometimes grown-ups make different choices, and you two are mine." Birthday cupcakes were homemade, decorated with wobbly frosting and infinite love. Bedtime stories were library books read 3 times each because new ones cost money they didn't have. The apartment above the bakery had become a home, cramped but warm, filled with crayon drawings and hand-me-down toys, and the sound of girls who knew they were wanted. But money stayed tight. Kayla's asthma medication cost $60 a month. Julia needed glasses at 4. Karen's car, a 15-year-old Honda, required constant prayer and occasional mechanical miracles. Loneliness crept in during late nights after the girls slept, when the silence reminded her she was doing this entirely alone. Still, she chose this life every single day. A world away in emotional distance, Brandon Lucas graced his 4th Forbes cover in 5 years. The monk of Silicon Valley, they called him, tech's most eligible bachelor. His net worth had tripled. Lucas Technologies dominated 3 markets. His penthouse collection had grown to include properties in Manhattan, San Francisco, and Tokyo, each one sterile, expensive, and empty. The Manhattan one was the largest, the one he'd shared with Karen, the one he could never bring himself to sleep in anymore. His PR team arranged dates with actresses and entrepreneurs, carefully photographed dinners that looked intimate but felt like business transactions. He attended galas and accepted awards with practiced humility, his speeches about innovation and legacy landing perfectly every time. But the board noticed the cracks. He'd walked out of 2 major presentations when an executive's toddler started crying in an adjacent conference room. Insomnia had carved shadows under his eyes that makeup artists struggled to hide for photo shoots. His assistant kept melatonin and anxiety medication in her desk drawer for his 3 a.m. emails requesting files he'd already reviewed. Every marketing deck that mentioned family values or building for future generations made his hands shake. He learned to skim those slides, to nod through the presentations while his therapist's voice echoed, "You're experiencing unresolved trauma, Brandon. Until you name it, it will control you." He refused to name it. The Pine Lake Resort deal came during a Q2 strategy meeting. His CFO pitched it as a perfect diversification play: luxury ecotourism, sustainable development, untapped market in upstate region with growing remote work demographics. 200 acres of pristine lakefront, the presentation stated. Small town, low resistance, high ROI. Brandon barely looked at the location map, too focused on projected returns and tax incentives. Approve it. Send the acquisition team. He didn't notice the name, Pine Lake. Didn't recognize the aerial photographs of quiet streets and a waterfront where a woman might walk with two small girls. The black SUV cut through Pine Lake's main street like a shark in a goldfish bowl. Brandon sat in the back, scrolling through emails, barely registering the mom-and-pop shops, the farmers market banners, the children's playground near the water. His team had booked him into the Pine Lake Inn for 3 days of site assessments and community meetings. Just another deal. Just another acquisition. He stepped out onto the sidewalk, adjusting his suit jacket, already planning his exit strategy. 2 blocks away, Karen was walking Kayla and Julia home from the library, their hands sticky with ice cream, their laughter carrying on the autumn breeze. The collision was 3 minutes away. Neither of them knew their carefully separated worlds were about to shatter. Saturday mornings at Pine Lake's farmers market smelled like possibility: fresh bread, late-season apples, coffee from the corner cart. Karen held both girls' hands, Kayla bouncing on her left, Julia observing the crowd on her right, their 5-year-old voices creating a soundtrack of joy that made every struggle worth it. "Mama, can we get cinnamon rolls?" Kayla tugged toward the Sunrise Bakery booth, where Mrs. Amber was already waving. "Please," Julia added, quieter but equally hopeful. Karen calculated quickly, $3 within this week's budget, and nodded. The girls cheered. Vendors called out greetings as they passed. "Morning, Karen." "Girl's getting so big." This was her world now. Small, known, safe. She didn't notice the black SUV parked near the community center. Brandon moved through the market like a man checking items off a list, his development team trailing behind, tablets out, capturing authentic local flavor for the resort's branding deck. His phone buzzed constantly, New York calling, Tokyo emailing, his empire demanding attention even here. "We need organic integration with the existing community narrative," his marketing director was saying. "Authentic connection points, local partnerships." Brandon wasn't listening. A child's voice cut through the market noise, pitched perfectly to shatter his practiced indifference. "Mama, I dropped my cinnamon roll." He looked up. The world stopped. Karen's profile, unmistakable even after 5 years. The curve of her jaw, the way she bent toward the child with infinite patience. But it was the 2 small girls flanking her that made the air leave his lungs. Dark hair like his, Karen's delicate features, but something in the bone structure of their faces that he recognized from every mirror he'd ever looked into. Twins. His vision tunneled. Sound became muffled, distant. His heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape. The twins. The baby he'd screamed at her to get rid of. Except not 1 child. 2. Karen straightened, comforting the girl who'd dropped her pastry, and her eyes swept the crowd in that protective way mothers do. Their gazes locked. 5 years collapsed into a single second. Brandon saw terror flash across her face, then something harder, steel wrapped in maternal fury. She gathered both girls closer, whispering something he couldn't hear, and turned away. "Karen!" His voice came out strangled, but she was already moving, guiding the twins through the crowd with practiced efficiency, disappearing between vendor booths before his frozen legs remembered how to function. His marketing director was still talking. The market continued around him, but Brandon stood paralyzed, staring at the space where his wife, his ex-wife, and his daughters had just been. Daughters, plural, real, alive. The investigators' report arrived within 5 days. Julia and Kayla Tyler, born 7 months after the divorce filing. Karen had given them her maiden name. cutting even that final legal tie to him. They lived with their mother in a modest apartment, no record of her taking spousal support or child support beyond the minimum settlement. Brandon found himself outside the Pine Lake Library on Thursday afternoon, drawn by information he shouldn't have, watching through the children's section windows like a ghost haunting his own abandoned life. Story time was ending. Karen sat cross-legged on a cushion, surrounded by children, the twins tucked against her sides. She was singing, soft, gentle, winding down the hour. The melody hit him like a physical blow, the lullaby he used to hum while they cooked dinner together in their first apartment, before the money, before the empire, when they were just Brandon and Karen playing at being grown-ups. She'd kept it. Somehow, despite everything, she'd kept this fragment of who they'd been. His hand knocked a stack of picture books from the display table. The crash echoed through the quiet library. Every head turned. Karen's voice cut off mid-phrase. Kayla and Julia looked up with identical expressions of curiosity. 3 pairs of eyes, 2 brown, 1 gray, fixed on him with varying degrees of recognition. Karen went pale. Her arms tightened around the girls. Brandon stood frozen in the children's section, surrounded by toppled books and shattered anonymity, face to face with the family he'd destroyed. Nobody moved. The moment stretched, crystallized, broke. Beth called on Monday morning, her voice careful. Someone wants to rent the studio space for a private conversation. He's offering $500 for an hour. Karen knew before Beth said the name. Brandon arrived at 6 p.m. with white roses, her old favorite, a detail that felt like manipulation, and a leather portfolio that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He'd aged in 5 years, sharper cheekbones, silver threading his temples, eyes that looked haunted despite the expensive suit. "Thank you for seeing me," he began, his rehearsed opener already grating. "I'm here so you'll stop lurking around my children." Karen stayed standing, arms crossed. "Say what you need to say." He laid the portfolio on the folding table like a peace offering. "I've established education trust for both girls. Full ride, any university. And I want to buy the studio. Put it in your name, secure your future." "Stop." Karen's voice cut like a blade. "You think you can write a check and erase what you did?" "I'm trying to help. You told me to get rid of it." She stepped closer, letting him see the steel 5 years had forged. "You screamed that you didn't want a child. You called our baby a complication. Kayla and Julia aren't problems to be provided for, Brandon. They're people. People you never wanted to be part of your life." His face crumpled. "I was terrified. So was I. But I chose them anyway." Karen picked up the portfolio and handed it back. "They don't need your guilt money. They need to be safe. And you walking into their world with your rescue fantasy? That's not safe." From the playground across the street, Julia noticed him first. "That's the man from the library," she whispered to Kayla, tugging her sister's sleeve. "The one who knocked over the books." Kayla squinted at the figure standing near the coffee cart, staring at their bench. "Why does he look so sad?" "Maybe he lost something," Julia said quietly, the way she said most things. The man bought 2 hot chocolates, but only drank one, leaving the other on their table as he walked away. Mama threw it in the trash without drinking it, her jaw tight. The next day, he was at the lakeside park, sitting on a bench 50 feet away, watching them feed ducks. When Kayla laughed at Julia falling in a puddle, the man's face did something strange, happy and broken at the same time. Then Kayla started running, too fast, too hard, and suddenly stopped, coughing. Karen was there instantly, pulling a small blue inhaler from her bag, helping Kayla use it. Brandon watched, memorizing every motion, and later that night searched childhood asthma emergency protocol until dawn. "He's always there now," Kayla told Julia that night. "It's weird." "Maybe he's lonely," Julia offered, though she pressed closer to Mama during bedtime stories, sensing something she couldn't name. The confrontation came on Friday, outside the bakery. Brandon stepped into Karen's path as she locked the door, desperation replacing his earlier polish. "I'm not giving up, Karen. I need to be part of their lives. I'll do whatever it takes." "Whatever it takes?" Karen's voice shook with fury, not fear. "You've been following us, watching them at the playground, showing up everywhere we go. You think that proves you've changed? I just want to know them. You want to ease your conscience. She fumbled with her keys, hands trembling. Stalking and pressure and throwing money at us. That's the same man who screamed at his pregnant wife. You haven't changed at all. That's not fair. Fair? Karen laughed bitterly. You don't get to talk to me about fair. Those girls have lived 5 years without you. They're happy, they're safe, they're loved. And you showing up like you have rights to them? I'm their father. The words hung in the cold air. Karen's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Then act like one. Fathers protect. They sacrifice. They don't buy flowers and expect forgiveness. If you want anything to do with my daughters, you prove, over months, over years, that you understand what you destroyed. Until then, stay away from us. She walked past him, shoulders straight despite the shaking. Brandon stood alone on the empty street, watching her disappear around the corner, finally understanding that his money, his power, his carefully constructed apologies meant absolutely nothing here. The community picnic was supposed to be perfect. Sunlight filtered through oak trees, children shrieked with joy near the water, and potluck tables groaned under casseroles and homemade pies. Karen spread a blanket while Kayla sprinted toward the playground, and Julia settled beside her with a library book. Stay where I can see you, Karen called. Kayla waved without slowing down. From the parking lot, Brandon sat in his rental car, hands gripping the steering wheel. He'd promised himself he'd leave town today. Stop torturing himself watching a life he'd never be part of. The engine was running. All he had to do was drive. Then he heard the scream. Kayla collapsed near the swing set, gasping, her lips already tinged blue. Karen ran, her mind white with terror, hands shaking as she dug through her bag for the inhaler. It slipped from her fingers. She grabbed it again, but her hands wouldn't steady, wouldn't cooperate. Mama, can't breathe. Kayla's voice was a whisper. The crowd gathered, useless and afraid. Someone shouted about calling 911. Julia stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. Then Brandon was there. He dropped to his knees beside Kayla, his voice calm and absolute. Kayla, look at me. You're okay. I've got you. He took the inhaler from Karen's trembling hands. How many puffs? He asked, his voice steady despite his racing heart. 2. Wait 10 seconds. Karen's voice was barely functional. Brandon followed her instructions exactly, his hands steady where hers had failed, administering the medication while counting aloud, keeping Kayla focused on his voice instead of her panic. Breathe with me, he said, demonstrating slow inhales. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Kayla's breathing hitched, stuttered, then began to even out. The ambulance arrived in minutes. Brandon climbed in without asking permission, still holding Kayla's hand, still counting breaths. As the doors closed, Karen heard him praying, raw, desperate words asking God to protect a child who didn't even know his name. Julia clutched Karen's hand in the car following behind, her small voice trembling. Mama, is Kayla going to be okay? No, baby. She's going to be okay. Karen said it like a vow, like faith could make it true. The hospital's fluorescent lights turned everyone into ghosts. Kayla was stable within an hour, oxygen levels rising, color returning, the attending physician praising whoever had administered the inhaler so quickly. Karen sat in a plastic chair, adrenaline crash leaving her hollow and shaking. Brandon paced the hallway like a caged animal, his expensive suit rumpled, his hands still trembling from terror he couldn't hide. Every few minutes he'd stop, check the room where Kayla rested, then resume pacing. Julia watched him with ancient eyes. Mama, who is he? Karen's breath caught. Someone who cares about you very much. When the doctor cleared Kayla to go home, Karen found Brandon in the waiting room, head in his hands. He looked up when she approached, his eyes red-rimmed and devastated. Thank you, Brandon. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried 5 years of walls beginning to crack. He stood, keeping distance between them. Is she? She's okay. Because of you. Silence stretched between them, different than before. Softer. Possible. When I saw her struggling to breathe at the park, I couldn't stop thinking about it, Brandon admitted quietly. I spent every night since then studying asthma protocols, watching emergency procedure videos, memorizing every step. I needed to know how to keep her safe, even if she'd never let me close enough to. His voice broke. Karen saw it then. Not the billionaire trying to purchase redemption, but a father terrified he'd lost something precious he never deserved in the first place. One visit, she said finally. Supervised, at the park. 1 hour. And Brandon? She met his eyes. If you hurt them, if you disappear on them after they start to trust you, I will make sure you never see them again. I understand. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because you saved my daughter's life. Don't make me regret it. The wall between them cracked, jagged, tentative, fragile. But it cracked. The first visit lasted exactly 1 hour at the lakeside park. Karen hovering 3 feet away while Brandon sat cross-legged on the grass, too nervous to breathe wrong. Kayla tested him immediately. Can you climb trees? I haven't in a long time. Then you're boring. But she stayed, circling him like a curious cat. Julia said nothing, just watched with those old soul eyes that saw everything. Weekly visits became the new routine. By the 3rd week, Brandon brought Uno cards. By the 5th week, Kayla was teaching him her made-up rules while Julia corrected her gently. By the 8th week, 2 months in, he arrived in old jeans instead of designer clothes, knowing paint and grass stains were inevitable. He learned their language. Kayla responded to challenges and movement, Julia to quiet patience and books. He memorized their favorite colors, their bedtime routines Karen mentioned in passing, the way Julia twisted her hair when thinking, and Kayla bounced when excited. Karen watched through the kitchen doorway during home visits, giving them space in the living room while staying close enough to intervene. Their laughter drifted through the small apartment. Part of her grieved for the father they should have had from birth. Part of her dared to hope that broken things could be repaired, that the man playing Candyland on her floor might actually be capable of change. Can I forgive without forgetting? She wondered. Can I let them love a man who once didn't want them? She didn't have answers. Only time would tell. But Brandon lived in constant terror. Every visit felt borrowed, temporary, one mistake away from losing them forever. His lawyers noticed his distraction during conference calls, his inability to focus on quarterly projections when his mind was calculating how to protect his access to the twins. You need to formalize this, his lead counsel pressed during a video call. You have parental rights, legal standing. Right now you're operating at her mercy. One bad day and she cuts you off. That's not what this is about. It's about leverage. Brandon, protection. You could win custody if it came to that. You have unlimited resources. She's barely. Stop. But the words planted themselves like landmines. The argument came on a Tuesday after Karen had to cancel a weekend visit because Julia was sick. Brandon's text response was too sharp, too demanding. The phone call escalated quickly. You can't just decide when I see them, Brandon snapped, fear twisting into aggression. I can when one of them has a fever, Karen shot back. This isn't about your schedule. I have rights, Karen, legal rights. If I wanted to, I could take this to court. I could win. The word hung in the air like poison gas. Win? Karen's voice went deadly quiet. You think our daughters are something to win? That's not what I meant. You sound exactly like the man who screamed at his pregnant wife. Her voice shook with fury. The CEO who thinks everything is a negotiation, a competition. Karen, please. No more visits. No more calls. You just proved you haven't changed at all. The line went dead. Brandon called back 17 times. Every call went to voicemail. 2 days later, he walked out of a shareholder presentation mid-sentence, his CFO's voice fading as panic closed his throat. 200 investors watched as Brandon Lucas, tech visionary, stumbled toward the exit, gasping for air. By the time he reached the hallway, tech blogs were already posting clips of the walkout, and his board was scheduling emergency calls. In the hallway, he collapsed against the wall, finally understanding what he'd become, his father, cold, controlling, using power to force love. He'd destroyed the only thing that mattered, again. Brandon sold his penthouse in Manhattan, stepped down as CEO of Lucas Technologies, a decision the board had been pressuring him toward ever since his public breakdown went viral, appointing his COO to lead while he transitioned to a non-voting advisory role. His therapist, a new one, someone who didn't accept deflection, made him say the words out loud. I told my wife to get rid of our children because I was terrified of becoming my father. The trust documents were ironclad, structured so Karen controlled everything: education, healthcare, expenses, with Brandon having zero access or veto power. He signed papers renouncing any custody claims, any legal leverage. His lawyers called it professional suicide. He called it the bare minimum. Then he prepared to leave Pine Lake forever, because loving them now meant not causing more damage. The text came at dawn. One conversation. The lake. Tomorrow at 6 a.m. Then you leave. Brandon arrived as the sun painted the water gold. Karen stood at the shoreline, arms wrapped around herself, looking older and stronger than the woman who'd left his penthouse 5 years ago. I'm not here to beg, he said, holding out a leather folder. These are the final documents. Everything's in your control. I've renounced any legal claims. I'm stepping away from the company, and I'm leaving town. Karen took the folder but didn't open it. Why? Because the worst day of my life was the one where I told you to get rid of our baby. His voice cracked. And my best days, the only ones that mattered, were the ones I got to watch Kayla and Julia from a distance. Even if they never knew me, at least I knew they existed, that they were loved by you. So you're running again. Karen's words were sharp but not cruel. Different costume, same escape. I'm trying not to hurt them more. By disappearing? She finally met his eyes. You think that's what they need? Another father who chooses leaving over staying? Brandon stared at her, lost. Karen's voice shook. I've been protecting them, but maybe I've also been protecting myself from the risk of letting you in and being destroyed again. She took a breath. So I need to know, if you stay, can you learn to be a father without trying to be a god in their lives? The question hung between them like a test with only one right answer. I don't want to be a god, Brandon said quietly. I don't want to be the man who controls or conquers or wins. I want to be their exhausted, imperfect, present dad, the one who shows up even when it's hard, who earns their trust one day at a time. Not a worship stranger, just their father. Karen was silent for a long moment, watching the water. Strict boundaries, she said finally. No overnight visits until they're ready. Shared therapy, all four of us. Gradual integration. And when they're old enough, we tell them the truth. All of it. No sanitized version. Whatever it takes. And Brandon? She turned to face him fully. If you use power, money, or fear to control any part of this, we're done. Forever. I understand. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a clean slate. It was something harder and more valuable. A narrow door opening onto a long, accountable road. 3 months of weekly family therapy, supervised visits that slowly extended from 1 hour to 3, and careful conversations about boundaries had built something fragile but real. The girls called him Brandon, not Dad. That would have to be earned over years, not months. Now, on a Saturday morning that felt like grace, Kayla and Julia raced along the shoreline, shrieking as cold water splashed their ankles. Karen held Kayla's left hand. Brandon held Julia's right. Between them, the girls formed a bridge neither parent had to cross alone. Again, Kayla demanded, and they ran toward the water once more. Karen caught Brandon's eye across the children's laughter. Not love, not yet, but possibility. May the Almighty bless every broken family learning to mend in truth, not fantasy. Every parent choosing humility over pride. Every child watching adults prove that people can change. This is not the end. It's the beginning of a longer story. One written in patience, boundaries, and costly grace. If this story touched your heart, like this video as a prayer for every family choosing redemption, share it with someone who needs to know broken things can be made whole. And subscribe to the Penthouse Diaries because every journey toward healing deserves to be witnessed. You are not alone, beautiful family.